Thank you so much for tuning in to HIPAA breach, identifying a breach and exceptions to a breach. And this presentation is brought to you by Healthcare Compliance Solutions. Please take a minute before you move forward to close down your other browsers. Please turn off your phones and make at least an hour for this presentation. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please comment in the comment section and we will respond at the end of the presentation. Okay, well, before we move into the presentation outline, I want to just make a note for everybody watching that record snooping has been around for a long time, and that is one of the primary reasons that we have HIPAA breaches. And certainly you can understand how folders can be left out, or somebody could come in and we have curiosity. Record snooping is an intrusive act that healthcare workers have they've engaged in that for a long time. However, with the HIPAA privacy rules, there are now serious repercussions for a healthcare worker and the office that they work for. In fact, the results of record snooping include the employee losing their job, public communication for the office involved, heavy monetary fines, and potential legal action. So things to be considered. Again, this is an intrusive act that has become a very big problem for the employee involved and for their employer. Now, who am I? My name is Lance King. It's likely that I am the reason that you're in this presentation, not because you're here to listen to me, but because we've connected on LinkedIn or you're a customer of ours. Just if you don't know much about me, one thing you'll know is I love to be very actively involved in the community. I love to educate. I'm very passionate about training and presenting. That's why you're seeing all these presentations. If you go to our YouTube channel, we have a few. So as far as me, I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah. I am very passionate about time with family like you are, family and friends. And I like to learn how to be more efficient so that I can spend more time with them. And if there's one thing I've learned since I've been in this industry is that healthcare administrators and doctors, boy, you don't have as much time in the majority of cases with your families as you'd like to. And so hopefully this presentation can help you to do more with less, because getting involved in a breach can really be quite hazardous and really take you away from your family. Now, who is Healthcare Compliance Solutions? Well, in short, we're a compliance partner for healthcare providers and business associates. We like to say that our mission is to incorporate a culture of compliance, and we do that with OSHA, HIPAA, Medicare, and employment law. And our belief is that the way you're going to incorporate a culture of compliance is by first identifying that this is a process and identifying a compliance officer who we can support with all the resources, with all the training, so that they feel like they can have some autonomy in that position, and feel like they're engaged in being able to communicate what is required in an ongoing process, which again is that culture you're trying to develop. Well, more about me. Part of what motivates me to train and to educate, and truly to get to be a little bit more serious on this. This is my youngest daughter, Malia, and Malia was life flighted to Primary Children's Hospital, one of I think the most amazing hospitals in the United States. Turns out that in 2000, and 15, there was this surge of RSV going rampant throughout the nation, very much so in Utah. And my daughter was affected. She was life flighted. And what we found were had two, sometimes even three babies in an intensive care unit. And as a surgical nurse, my wife was absolutely terrified that with this sick little kid, that she was going to contract some other viruses. In fact, one of the kids next to us, the little babies, had pneumonia, and Linda went to one of the nurses and said, "Hey, I'm pretty nervous. I'm not seeing people sanitizing as much, and their protective equipment is, they're not always shielding themselves when they come in to our area of the room versus the other child's." And at any rate, Malia ended up getting pneumonia. She had the adenovirus, the rhinovirus, RSV, and for us, we felt, we were really frustrated. We knew that Primary Children's was doing the best they could, and they did an amazing job. We are so grateful, so grateful. Nonetheless, we felt that there was an OSHA breach. In this case, it may be very benign, but we nearly lost our daughter, and correlate a lot of that to the fact that she was surrounded by a lot of sick kids, and and it was a challenge for the healthcare providers to be as sanitized as they needed to be. And they assured us that it wouldn't be a problem, but how can you really know in that kind of a setting? So I want to protect families from anything with OSHA. We've had some billing issues in the past as well, where it turns out after they investigated, we actually did win the battle when refuting some of the the charges that had taken place, and that was actually during the time ICD-10 was being introduced. Also, I showed this picture of a frustrated person because we learned that bank accounts and different things were being taken over by somebody who had stolen my wife's identity. And identity theft is a very real and a very, 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 very prominent issue that we're dealing with in the United States. A lot of hackers are getting medical records, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I want to bring these things up because identity theft cases, they can take an average of 300 hours for individuals to recover from, and we know by experience how painful that can be. I had a friend contact me 2 days ago. He sent me a text and said, "You'll never believe this. I had a letter come in the mail saying that the family practice that we took our kids to had a breach, and that we should," and talked about, they did a very good job outlining the notification of what they needed to do, the different people they've notified, and who they should then notify and kind of keep tabs on. So again, these kind of things affect the family. So that's why I'm here. I want to protect practices. I went through about 100 practices here in Utah and was amazed to see that most did not have an adequate compliance program. In fact, I was embarrassed for so many practices as I went through a very simple audit checklist, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a few minutes, probably 25, 30 minutes. And many of them didn't have the safeguards. They were whispering when they were around patients and doing a few things that just really common sense, but certain safeguards and certain procedures were not in place. And I'll tell you, that makes me nervous, and we need to do more to create awareness. Please, doctors that are watching, administrators, please, how many practices do you suspect that you'll be going to this year? And wouldn't you want your information protected? Please, think of your families when you think of protecting your practice. So here's what to expect. On the outset of this presentation, I want to just let you know I'm going to talk quite a bit about record snooping, just because I was talking with someone just yesterday, worked at a medical office, said that they always had paper records just laying around. And and he saw people would open these files that shouldn't. He indicated he was very well aware of of people that were famous community members that had their records looked at, and they talk amongst each other. I mean, come on, this is a very big issue, and so I feel like we need to address this. Going to go through some specific examples, some of the consequences, some of the responsible parties, talk through some corrective and preventative action that can be done in-house, how to conduct a self-audit, and then introduce some compliance solutions. And part of that, I will just say, we will be talking about our program. And so again, if any of these you feel like could benefit other people, please share this. Our company will send you a $100 gift card to say thank you if anybody purchases this, and by sharing this in your social media, you really make a tremendous difference. Hopefully leaders are watching this to understand some of the HIPAA regulations, how to implement HIPAA privacy and security. We'll get into just a little bit of that. This is the third webinar of 12 in a series of creating a culture of compliance. So know that with every webinar we'll kind of review we'll touch on what's been touched on before, but we would invite you to go back. You can go into our YouTube channel. You can go to other posts that I have on my LinkedIn page under Lance King's LinkedIn page, and you can find these recordings in the posts. Okay, so one thing to say, yes, of all the healthcare services, we get it. We're not always the highest on the totem pole and in your priority list, but hopefully through creating awareness, and if you could help us create awareness as well, we can climb up there. Now, one thing I thought I'd share with you, there is a lot going on within the Department of Health and Human Services. If you follow any cybersecurity podcasts or are watching the news on what's happening with the Trump administration, you'll know that within the Office for Civil Rights, there is a lot taking place with cybersecurity, and there's going to be a lot moving forward to protect this country from a lot of the attacks that's taken place. And fairly recently, Devin McGraw of HHS, Office for Civil Rights, was in the process of verifying addresses of certified entities and business associates for phase 2 audits. And this is something that didn't too long ago. I don't know if you've heard of anybody that's gone through the audit. Just as kind of a mention, with a lot of these audits, HHS will be emphasizing on-site audits in 2017. Last year, 167 covered entities were selected to participate in desk audits, and Jocelyn Samuels indicated that there's about 250 audits that they ended up conducting last year. So audits are taking place. These are audits that were random, and the main focus has been for the OCR to enable their organization to figure out what the best practices and the best practices of proactively uncovering and addressing risks and vulnerabilities to protected health information, or PHI as I'll reference it. And so these audits, really, they should assist OCR and companies like ours to just understand how to weight corrective and preventative actions. And we'll talk about some of them to prevent these unfortunate security breaches that really are increasing every day. So I don't know if you've seen this, I don't know if you've been reading through this, but this is a document that's been sent to a lot of practices before they are audited. So this is one of my favorite pictures. You've probably seen another presentation. It says, "Oh, that's a time-saving system we came up with. If we ever forget our username or password, we just look it up on one of the sticky notes." So I get we have systems, and if you've been in practice for many years, it's probably been challenging as you hear many of these electronic health record systems surface, and the HITAC Act move in, and we're creatures of habit, so we can understand if there's some things that you're still struggling with, but hopefully you can take a few things out of this presentation that can, again, promote a more secure atmosphere. In addition, we recognize that we all only have 168 hours in a week. I've heard often people referencing individuals like an Albert Einstein, and all of the things that he accomplished in his life, and all these other amazing influencers in history, and thinking, well, how did they do all this with only 24 hours in a day, 168 hours in a week? And we realize this week, if you look back on the week, today is Friday, you've had this big glass full of what you can offer in the practice, and patients certainly should be a glass that's filled up to the top, and in fact overflowing, but we are all only able to give so much time. The problem is, a lot of practices, again, the 100 practices, out of the 100 practices I visited with here in Utah, 90% had virtually nothing with their compliance program. So hopefully, again, we can change that. And again, we realize there's a lot going on in your life outside of the office, and so to avoid a mind breach with your mind's energy and focus, we do invite you to, again, be completely present so that we can give you peace of mind. So what is record snooping? Record snooping is unauthorized access to PHI. And this type of a privacy invasion happens when any employee accesses PHI without cause. Usually it is for their own personal or somebody else's desire to have a knowledge of that person's PHI, their personal health information. And we're all human, and such are naturally curious. Protecting the privacy of patient records is top priority. It really has to be a top priority as a healthcare provider, and that must mean internally and externally. Okay, so curiosity and PHI, not a good combination. Okay, so it violates patients' privacy. The HIPAA violation causes public embarrassment for your practice. It lowers the public perceived confidence in your practice, and can lead to a large fine. So I want to address some examples real quick of the types of HIPAA breaches in particular. First, start off with this quote: "Somehow your medical records got faxed to a complete stranger. He has no idea what's wrong with you either." So the funny thing is, you'd be amazed on how many times we hear, even people that are customer of ours, they have slips where they'll fax or email information to a completely different person, and that can result in a lot of pain. UCLA health system agreed to pay a settlement of $865,500 with federal regulators, and the why is because two celebrity patients alleged that hospital employees broke the law and reviewed their medical records without authorization. Okay, that's a pretty big settlement. I'm sorry, really only goes so far. And Carolean Clinic in Roanoke, Virginia, they fired 14 employees for patient record snooping, and 14 were found to have accessed patient records without any legitimate patient care need. Again, curiosity killed the cat in this situation. Another example, a student healthcare worker named Catherine, fired from the University of Iowa Health Center for violating the privacy of a pregnant female student. And also her well-known student athlete boyfriend. So in this particular example, for 14 years, Catherine received HIPAA privacy training, but that didn't stop her from revealing out loud to at least one nearby coworker that, quote, she hoped the young couple was happy with the positive results of the pregnancy test. Now that may seem very, very, very simple, very human-like to say something like that. But she went so far as to point out the student athlete to one of the clerks. He was in the waiting room. Then she inappropriately accessed the patient chart at least twice, opening the record from past visits and also looking at the medication records. So what happened? Well, the clerk spoke to two of the medical assistants there, and they were the ones that treated the female student. And the clerk asked about the couple's reaction to the news of the positive pregnancy test. So the results were that the medical assistants reported the inquiry to the manager as a possible privacy violation as it was, and then she was fired. And that's just awful. And that's just a really small thing, but for this particular practice, their sanction policy was that based on what had happened, that really puts them at risk. So the Everett Clinic in Everett, Washington, they use what's called fair warning software. Have you heard of that? Well, it red flags unauthorized access to EPHI. Kind of a neat software. Well, not long after they started using fair warning, 13 staff members and physicians were fired because there were various incidents involving inappropriate access. So even if you have something that is in place and your team's aware, again, curiosity can get the best. Now, Becky Hood, the CIO of Everett Clinic, says, quote, "Our policy leans toward no tolerance, but will investigate each situation to determine if the incident was malicious, accidental, staff member didn't understand the rules." And I think that's quite instructive. I think people should get the benefit of the doubt if possible, and really you should have a hierarchy of sanction policies so that you don't have to fire some good people. Now, at this point, you may say, well, this is kind of how I feel. To quote the image, according to your HIPAA release form, I can't share anything with you. Okay, certainly that that may feel like the case, but once we understand, once we become educated on what is required, we can relax a little bit more. So who can be held liable for HIPAA violations? This is a very common question, and I want to answer it for you. So the Department of Justice concluded that the criminal penalties for a violation of HIPAA are directly applicable to covered entities. And that includes health plans, healthcare cleaning houses, healthcare providers who transmit claims in electronic form, and it includes Medicare prescription drug card sponsors. Okay, so that's their take. Now, as far as individuals, the individuals can be directors, employees, or officers of the covered entity. That's compliance officers, where the covered entity is not an individual. They may also be directly criminal liable under HIPAA in accordance with principles of corporate criminal liability. and where an individual of a covered entity is not liable under HIPAA, he or she can still be charged with conspiracy or aiding and abetting. So just kind of an overarching rule to this is, if you intentionally did something, and we'll talk about some of the exceptions, excuse me. Now, what about whistleblowers? A lot of times people say, well, what happens to me? So you may ask about the image here. Let me just quickly explain. You may or not understand the relevance of an image of Edward Snowden. He's a former CIA employee and former contractor for the United States government who copied and leaked classified information from the NSA, or the National Security Agency. That was just back in 2013, not too long ago. And of course, there's a movie made on this whole thing because he did so without prior authorization. And excuse me, it is a subject of controversy. He has been called a hero. He's been called a whistleblower, also a dissident, a patriot, and a traitor, because his disclosures have actually fueled debates over mass surveillance, government security, and the balance between national security and information privacy. So this is a big deal, hence the movie and hence the controversy. And I'll let you be the judge of how you perceive his actions. I will say that what he did took some courage. He did what he thought was right, and he did so regardless of the consequences. And so that's why I think it's appropriate to have him there. So while I'm not saying to blow the whistle on your practice, I want it to be clear, and certainly doctors, I'm not saying that to your patients, say blow the whistle on your doctor's office. But I want it to be clear that if you're in a practice that takes the position of not caring about patient information, or who's in the position of selling patient records or doing anything that's illegal, please, people, have the courage to do what's right. Begin taking the corrective actions necessary. If you need to know what to do, I can share a few ideas in just a minute. So what agency enforces HIPAA regulations? So it's the HHS Office for Civil Rights, or OCR. They enforce the privacy standards, while the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS as they're called. So you've got HHS, you've got OCR, and you've got CMS. And CMS enforces the transaction and the code set standards, and enforcement of the civil monetary provisions has not been tasked to an agency. So just focus on the OCR at CMS, and that's really all you need to know with that. So we briefly mentioned a few ways patient information is being breached, had a few specific examples. Consider what you're seeing in front of me, though. So as technology advances, there will be more platforms, more applications, and more people to transfer patient records. So therefore, this means that there is going to be higher risk and a greater need for security protocols. And unfortunately, this analysis is coming as a result of regular breaches that are being seen almost daily. If you follow a lot of the LinkedIn posts, if you're on LinkedIn, they come all the time. I've put in a Google alert HIPAA breaches and healthcare breaches, so that I get emailed all the articles that relate with that. And again, almost daily there are articles that are out there. So some of the most vulnerable and upcoming risks as they relate to PHI, I just wanted to walk you through those, and we'll start at the very top and then just go clockwise. So if you're looking at the tablet, you've got the advancing electronic medical records that can be accessed on tablets. Tablets, just generally, without even knowing that they're medical records, are being stolen all the time. Can you imagine if somebody was looking for medical records? I mean, they're going to be, tablets aren't that difficult to take. The second, email services such as Gmail. there nothing should be sent through these types of email accounts because they are not encrypted. Now you can, I'm learning that there are some services that you can pay for within these types of things, but you've got to make sure you have encrypted email. Upcoming medical advancements, okay, to move down under that Gmail image. Such as Johnson & Johnson's insulin pump. Not sure if you heard, but Tuesday in October of last year, there was an article posted saying that Johnson told patients they'd learned of a big cybersecurity bug in one of the insulin pumps, and that hackers could exploit to overdose diabetic patients with insulin. So that's a big risk. I have a neighbor across the street that his daughter uses a unit like this, and that's he expressed that this was something that, while he doesn't, he's not staying up at night about it. I mean, they did make the decision to move forward with it because the risk, hacking risk, is relatively low according to Johnson. It is still a risk, and there are more and more of these products that are going to come out, which, again, if they're not meeting HIPAA standards, it could be really problematic. Medical device experts, though, they do see that with Johnson's case, it was kind of the first time a manufacturer had issued a warning to patients about any cyber vulnerability. And again, that's because they are a little bit newer. But just some things to think about. I know there have been some issues with pacemakers and defibrillators. Okay, say that 10 times fast. Okay, even one time was difficult for me. At any rate, defibrillator. There we go. Okay, so then paper records. They're always an easy target if a record gets misplaced because it's taken home on accident or put in the trash. I mean, that could be really problematic. And then you've got a business associate, such as IT companies, accounting firms, anesthesiologists, anybody that has to view patient information. And so these are some things. And then the very last one is just the communication that a lot of healthcare providers have in office internally, where they're texting back and forth and they're sharing information. A lot of things have been leaked on social media platforms like Twitter. Doctors have been in trouble because of things they've shared with one of their patients. Wheat. So some things to keep in mind. So, identifying a breach. Quote, unless the covered entity or business associate, as applicable, demonstrates that there is a low probability that the protected health information has been compromised based on a risk assessment of at least the following factors. Okay, now this comes from HHS. And so, again, a breach is generally the impermissible use or disclosure under the privacy rule that compromises the security or privacy of PHI. I read the definition from HHS, and the nature and extent of the PHI involved, including the types of identifiers and likelihood of re-identification, is the first factor. The second is the unauthorized person who used the protected health information or to whom the disclosure was made. Third, whether the PHI was actually acquired or viewed. And fourth, the extent to which the risk to the PHI has been mitigated. Okay, so that's kind of the technical way to look at identifying a breach. And so you have the discretion to provide the required breach notifications following any, as they say, impermissible use or disclosure without performing a risk assessment to determine the probability that the PHI has been compromised. So a few things to consider with a HIPAA breach. So, by the way, HIPAA, I should back up and say HIPAA, if you're not sure what it stands for, HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Okay. So with a HIPAA breach, suppose a member of the office just accidentally mailed out an appointment list for the day containing patient names, date of birth, social security numbers, and phone numbers to another patient along with their new patient packet. What do you do? I mean, look at that office manager. Can you imagine? By the way, I went to the dentist yesterday and filled out all my information. And, it made me nervous to see that after I walked away from the chair, that my information was just sitting there. And I did ask about it, and certainly they were very busy and they hadn't, filed it away. But I just my personality, I do get nervous with things like that. But just a few questions. If there's a breach, do your staff know who to go to for leadership when there is a breach? Does your designated HIPAA compliance officer know all of the necessary steps to take in a breach notification? And finally, does your HIPAA compliance officer know where to receive their guidance? I mean, how are they being informed? How are they staying updated? Do they know how the forms should be filled out, which forms to use, which procedures they should be reviewing with staff regularly to make sure that they are being incorporated? Some questions to ask. In Congress, they've created an extension breach notification requirement as part of the HITECH Act. I mentioned that briefly. So after a breach is discovered, here's some things to take notes on. The provider should do these 6 things. First is provide notification to each individual whose PHI was breached within 60 days, and that's what happened with my friend that I mentioned earlier. And that notification should include a brief description of what happened, the date of the breach, and the date of discovery. Okay. Second thing, a description of the type of PHI involved and the steps the individual should take to protect themselves from potential harm. The third, a brief description of what the office is doing to investigate, mitigate losses, and of course, protect against any future breaches. And certainly include contact information so that people can ask questions. I know that's tough to even consider answering everybody's questions, but sometimes they just want additional information. And most of us, like when we went through the identity theft, we didn't really know what to do. So you don't really prepare for these kind of things. We really do trust the doctors so much with our information. Next, so the last 3 things. So provide a written notification via first class mail or email if that is the preferred communication, and they'll kind of make note of that when they come into your visit to do the visit. 5th, notify prominent media outlets only when the PHI is 500 or more. Okay, there's no reason to leak out this information to make this monster deal out of something that just doesn't need to be shared with everybody. And then lastly, report all breaches to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, which is actually part of HIPAA. So 3 exceptions to a breach as far as the definition of a breach, as I've just mentioned. So the first exception applies to the unintentional acquisition, access, or use of PHI by a workforce member or by a person acting under the authority of a covered entity or business associate if such acquisition, access, or use was made in good faith and within the scope of authority. Excuse me. The second exception applies to the inadvertent disclosure of protected health information by a person authorized to access PHI at a covered entity or business associate to another person authorized to access that PHI at the covered entity or business associate or organized healthcare arrangement in which the covered entity participates. Okay, that's kind of a lot right there. But in both cases, the information cannot be further used or disclosed in a manner that's not permitted by the privacy rule, and that's kind of the overall arching thing. The third exception applies if the covered entity or business associate had a good faith belief that the unauthorized person to whom the impermissible disclosure was made would not be able to retain that information. So the audit protocol covers privacy rule requirements for notice of privacy practices for PHI, rights to request privacy protection for PHI, access to individuals for PHI, administrative requirements, and there's more. Okay, and we'll actually get into more of this in another. I just want to say that, here's kind of a breakdown of HIPAA violations. Physical theft is the largest. So again, with the tablets, with EMR software being put on tablets, phones, and things are being stolen, paper records. So just be aware. And also, business associates are one of the main reasons. If you have several business associates that are helping you with various things with your patients, make sure that they've signed a business associate contract that says that they're following HIPAA, that they have the necessary safeguards. There was the Women in Infants Hospital of Rhode Island. They agreed just a few months ago to pay $550,000 in settlements after properly updating their business associate agreements, which is required by HIPAA. And those business associates had some pretty big issues. So want to get into the 3 levels of sanctions. Now, we've talked about a couple of examples with sanction policies. The consequences for record snooping, because that's usually where things go, they really can vary widely, and we've heard, again, some examples of some pretty harsh conditions where people are just straight up fired, to cases where in their policy they've determined that they really want to investigate things. So you have to really consider what's going to work best for you. So there's a zero tolerance policy that can work under certain conditions, but boy, that might not be the best for your culture. The thing that a lot of organizations that we're finding are they're implementing a progressive system with the level of sanctions, kind of like you would with children. If your children do something one time, you may say something. If it's the second time, you let them know the consequences, and then the third time they get a pretty, they're in the garage for timeout kind of a thing. So you've got three levels that I want to go through. With an accidental breach, so a possible scenario is an employee does not log off a computer after they've used it. They faxed the wrong PHI to another practice. The PHI is emailed to the wrong email address. Okay, so these are some examples. So the sanction in this case would be, as you'll see in the bottom, a warning and then retraining. Okay, and this is our recommendation to you. This has really been effective for a lot of our practices. And then verbal warning documented in the employee's file. And then, again, retraining for the first offense. Continued offenses will then lead to progressive discipline, and hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully you can correct it early. So level 2, and I'll give you some more examples. Level 2, intentional breach without harmful or dishonest intentions. So some of the possible scenarios with this is, and we've talked mostly about this. So viewing patient records just simply out of curiosity, sharing PHI, which is any information that can identify a patient. So that's diagnosis or treatment. That's any of the financial information or even photos. In any personal communications or on social networks, which is, again, as I mentioned, has become problematic. And again, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't share their information just because you feel like it's interesting. It can't be shared for that reason. It has to be for treatment purposes. Another scenario is an employee shares a computer password. And then last example I'm going to give you is just discussing patient information in an unsecured area. So a lunchroom was something my wife heard a lot as a nurse. A lot of times she'd be in the lunchroom and she'd hear about all these other cases, and yeah, you probably shouldn't do that. So the sanction is a written warning and re-education, but possible suspension. Okay, so that's kind of where it carries over. So every time you should give a warning. Every time there's any type of a breach, you should be doing retraining. Okay. So then there is the harmful breach. And this is a level 3, willful or intentional breach with harmful or dishonest intentions. The possible scenarios I have here are using PHI for personal gain, marketing without authorization is an example, using PHI to cause harm, so exposing information to unauthorized individuals or social networks because you dislike that person. That is not a healthy decision. Somebody gives access to a restricted area to somebody that should not be in that area. And then the last example is give access to PHI to an unauthorized individual. And that's just kind of a general thing. So the sanction in this case is just termination. We've given some examples on things. So yes, we're all curious. The problem is a harmful breach can lead to termination and potentially some legal action. So just not a good position to be in for record snooping, for example, with the price of losing the job or legal action. So just respect privacy, and that will protect all of us. So there you go. So just a couple of things, ways to prevent. First is to conduct a security risk analysis, preferably guided by experienced compliance professionals. And this step alone shows your practice due diligence in protecting confidential patient data, gives you kind of a 360-degree view of some of your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and the threats. And by the way, the risk assessment is actually required by HIPAA. Now, if you get a call from someone that says that you're that they're a government entity, make sure it is HHS. If they're saying, I want to see your risk assessment, or I want to do a risk assessment, or I want to charge you for risk assessment, check with me on that. I'd be happy to investigate what's happening and can help you make the best decision that way. Because I know there are a lot of people out there that will basically they'll put out a risk assessment there just as a way to become a consultant for you or to be your compliance partner. Next is make sure that you're regularly communicating your no snooping policy to your employees. And I love this picture of the dog because it is awful. That is super sad. Oh, that is so sad. But with dogs, you try to be as consistent as you can. When you potty train, for example, and the less consistent you are, the more chances you have of that dog pooping on your carpet, right? I know this because we just got a puppy not too long ago, and I learned that lesson the hard way, unfortunately. So every new hire should get both a written and verbal orientation of your practices, zero tolerance policy on record snooping. That just kind of goes without saying, and that should extend to all your business associates, including the accountants, lawyers, and any of the IT professionals that are helping you. And as I mentioned, changes in HIPAA rules, your practice can now be fined if a business associate does the snooping. Can you believe that? So something to consider. Also, give the employees only the minimum necessary access to PHI. That is it. And that's kind of a safe rule across the board. Your receptionist doesn't need to access clinical data, which eliminates the temptation to peek into Brad Pitt's files, right? Or those of an ex-spouse or those of a neighbor. Can you imagine? Oh, I wonder what my neighbor has. I want to keep my kids away. You can't look at their file. You can't do that. And then the last way I'll give you is to password protect medical files, depending on a need to know basis. So employees should be frequently reminded that the practice, it prohibits sharing of passwords and user IDs. So with breach notification, this is a HIPAA protocol under the breach notification rule. Yeah, it's unlikely an organization is going to be able to prevent every possible IT security incident. That's why it really is a critical step to develop a plan of action for when a breach does occur. You shouldn't just try to protect data, but also implement an incident response plan when any hacks have been identified. Okay, and here we're seeing on the screen just kind of a percentage of breach notifications, reasons behind that. And whether a breach is due to negligence or malicious actions, employees are often involved in the healthcare data breaches, which is what we've illustrated. So employee awareness and incident response training, we highly recommend that that's implemented. Electronic health record specialists would also suggest remote storage and data backup systems. I talked with a guy yesterday that his practice had never ever done backup, and they'd been in practice for 30 years. They just had all these stacks of files, and and again, that old saying, if you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That was kind of what he was saying about this guy. But boy, think of all the people that could be affected, and maybe there had been a lot of people affected along the way. So I mean, while this may not seem like a necessarily strong defense against any hackers by backing things up, it does provide security for healthcare organizations against any or just natural disasters that could destroy any files. So creating a culture of compliance. We talked about Catherine being fired from the University of Iowa Health Center for violating the pregnant female student and her well-known athlete boyfriend. Things like this. If you have a culture of compliance where you're deliberately emphasizing PHI confidentiality on a regular basis, you're just not going to have someone who's been there for 14 years get fired. So again, speak often about the importance of trust in the patient-provider relationship. Remind your workforce that patients expect your practice to be a good steward of their information. Continually remind the staff to safeguard patient confidentiality and the security. Make sure your staff has a copy of your policies and your procedures. Address your staff with questions and get outside resources if you need to. And certainly continue to assess your job functions to make sure those individuals that access PHI, that that they're being considered as, on a scale, that they're being considered on a scale of how much information pertains to their job. So this is something that oftentimes it hits to the core. not a lot of people like the word discipline, but let's just break up this in terms of, this is required for a culture of compliance. You certainly have to be disciplined, and where it is a process, you really have to merchandise the progress you're making, leaders, with your staff. If you are kind of in the trenches or just starting out, you've got to remind people on a regular basis that you're working toward being fully compliant. So begin documenting a formal process for initiating and terminating access. Usually the office manager should establish and document controls for granting and terminating employee access to patient records. And access really needs to be immediately shut down when any employee leaves the practice. Okay, that's absolutely got to happen. Also, communicate and enforce disciplinary actions for snooping, and we've gone through some of the sanction policies and the different levels that should be implemented. And employees, they need to know up front. They shouldn't be blindsided that you have all these safeguards and things in place. So they should know what the consequences are going to be given record snooping, for example, such as suspension or termination if there's malicious intent. Remember to conduct background checks, to follow rules, ERISA rules, but yeah, connect background and reference checks before new employees start your job. Many of the snooping violations do go unreported, but if you run these checks, they will manifest reasonable due diligence and may prevent some costly fines and a tarnished reputation for the practice. Now, the last thing I'll say about this, just allow your patients to restrict the sharing of PHI. Kind of goes without saying, but you really, again, you're required to honor a patient's special request for privacy. Again, if an ex-spouse of one of your nurses requests that he or she should not have access to PHI, please honor that. This presentation is to protect your practice, and also we don't want you to go through a 90-day audit, okay? And if you're audited, you're going to get a notification letter that'll be mailed to you. They'll want you to upload documents to a site that can help them identify how consistent you've been with compliance documentation. If they have to, they'll do some on-site field work. They draft a report that's then signed with corrective actions. I mean, it's just a really drawn-out process that you don't want to be involved in. There's too many patients out there that need you to focus on them. So leaders, please cast the vision. Many of you have been in leadership roles for many years, and you may agree that there's been peaks and valleys. I love the quote. I love it on the mountaintop, but it's in the valley where I grow. And many of you watching this may be in the valley saying, hey, we need to start implementing more of the things that we've shared, more of these policies and procedures, more of an action plan that's formal and that has some continuity in it. Okay. So cast the vision, train your people, lead out in a culture of compliance by regularly communicating, being a guide to what's required, help people to be accountable. We did a presentation on this last week on leadership. So another thing I'll say is the very first thing that we'd recommend you do internally is conduct a self-audit, so you can get that 360-degree health checkup of how you're doing. Okay, and here's just a real brief synopsis of what goes into that. So you've got your policies and your procedures you check on, your ongoing documentation that should be implemented, and that includes all the forms that patients sign, all the forms that are required for business associates. You've got training, business associate contracts, risk analysis, and risk management action plan, and the security incident and breach management, okay, which we've talked a little bit about. When I've gone to practices, I mentioned a form that I'll talk to a lot of practices with. I took this form to about 100 practices, and when I'd go through this, I would just put a big no in so many of these areas. I mean, no compliance plans, no training, no formal training at least, and no risk assessment. So if you'd like, I can send this to you, and this can be something that you could put a date on, and right away, if you were audited and an auditor saw that you were because of a breach, of course, and an auditor saw that you'd at least done this, that would put you so far ahead. If not, here's some of the penalties for violation of HIPAA rules. So they do vary. Example, if the office is found to be in a state of noncompliance with HIPAA regulations, but the administrator and compliance officer does make an attempt, like I just mentioned, but simply didn't know what to do to correct things, the fees can range from $100 to $50,000 per violation. So that's really the lowest end. And I mean, even you being here, you could show a history of watching this. So, which is another reason why you should share it with people, right? So on the other end, if an office is found to be in a state of noncompliance with HIPAA, and the attitude is, I don't really care, why should I do this? That kind of an attitude, the fines go up to $50,000 plus per violation. So they add up quickly. A lot of times we will see many of the emails that we receive, and many of the updates are well into the millions. So I show you this diagram now just because many physicians or administrators, if you are in the valley where you're looking to climb up to the top with this culture of compliance, so that years down the road you can look out and look back to see all these pieces that have fit together to create just a fabulous culture that's kept you safe, that's provided an increasing reputation, an increasingly good reputation, etc. A lot of times physicians will look at the real problem with compliance is not having enough time, it being very expensive, but they reach out to companies looking for protection, looking to receive some sort of a plan, some sort of a proposal, then to begin acting and to determine positive or negative results with that. And I'd like to take a minute, if I may. I'm going to share our compliance solution. We do make the paces fit, so you don't have to. And I was talking with a lady yesterday, Connie, if you're watching, you'll recall that in your large organization of several practices, we make the pieces fit so you don't have to. I know one of Connie's concerns was, I'm one person, we have all these healthcare providers, we have 1,500 staff, and I just can't do it all. How do I make these pieces come together? And how do I do it within OSHA, HIPAA, Medicare, and employment law? So I'll talk in just a minute about what we do to support, given that this is a real big issue. I just want to go back to this security risk analysis. And even if you determine you don't want to utilize a HCSI or a company like ours, you want to do everything in-house, we recommended a self-audit. And I just wanted to say again that if you don't know this, I am willing to give you a risk analysis. Okay, I do it at least this week. Boy, it's felt like I've given them out every single day. So I can send you a PDF that will go through risk analysis that, again, you can document that and put it in a binder. And if an auditor is ever there, at least you'll be able to show that you're working toward that culture of compliance. So the first thing people will typically come to the realization is that they need compliance training. A lot of times they think, well, who's going to do that? Well, you've got in-office training, you've got online training, and you've got outsourced where you bring someone in, or you outsource, where you get a company like ours, or you go to a seminar. Training in HIPAA privacy and security is mandatory. It needs to be documented, and it needs to be ongoing. So first things first, you need to make sure you have someone as a compliance officer, somebody that can gain a full understanding of the HIPAA rules. And they need time for training. They need time to understand the role. There are so many pieces that they need to gradually figure out. Okay, there's again forms, and there's a reference guide. They have to figure out how to use it as a reference. So employees also must be given enough time. I should say that, because certainly their responsibilities are not just one or two, they have many. But they need to understand their responsibilities in protecting EPHI. Okay. So make sure that training is documented and kept with other compliance documentation, such as that risk assessment. And recently, I spoke with an office manager. She was trying to develop her own HIPAA compliance training for her staff. She mentioned to me she had scheduled out a block of time to work on the training, but every time she sat down to write, she was interrupted. And she said, hey, I had multiple attempts. I had several months go by, no training course. And to go the route of hiring an attorney to customize a program, just so you're aware, it can cost in the neighborhood of $20,000. And so outsourcing, I mean, there really are some great options out there, but you've got to make sure you do what works for you. So with training, I'll just say training online can be great, because as people go through programs like this, they like what we do healthcare compliance training online is one of our pieces within the compliance spectrum. And you can't see it, it's grayed out, but there's a next button that as the staff go through the training, they are quizzed, but they also have to agree to the procedure. So when they get that certificate, they have covenanted to obey the laws of the practice, the laws of the land. So we've talked about some of your options. Sometimes people can view having somebody come into the office, like a consultant or an attorney, as being a bad thing, just because some consultants will charge in the neighborhood of $500 to $700 an hour. We've heard of consultants I'm sorry, not an hour, that will charge $500 to $700 a day, and the highest I've heard of is $1,200 a day. And oftentimes it can take a couple of days to have a consultant develop your plans, train your staff. Sometimes I have this as a negative, because a lot of times they'll try to be the compliance officer, the compliance representative, the person that's supposed to be answering questions and getting people to go through the forms, and the person that's supposed to be looking out over the staff to make sure that they are keeping HIPAA and OSHA, and so to have a consultant come in, that might be a first step, but as far as something that's an ongoing thing, it really is best to have something that's more in-house. So you can do everything in-house. My example with the woman I spoke with was to illustrate that it can be really arduous. It can be something that could take a lot of time. So these are some of the options. An online approach is a great approach. You really have to consider whether there are pros and cons for you. Certainly, it's more cost effective. Companies like ours work with a compliance officer to train them so they can focus more on in-house and overseeing what's happening and being that trusted advisor. So for those of you that are watching now, I'm just going to be sharing what to expect with healthcare compliance solutions. Okay. So I hope that you'll tune in. And again, please take a quick minute to share this. If you have a second to share this with other people that you think it could be helpful for. So the three things that you have with HCSI is we provide a membership website portal, and I'll get into some of the details of what are in that, compliance binders, and ongoing support. Okay, we really do try to make this very, very simple. Compliance is difficult enough. It has enough challenges. So with the online portal for new employees and for retraining, you have HIPAA privacy, HIPAA security, OSHA, Medicare, and employment law. Okay, so all of these can be done, and we really are an all-in-one resource. A lot of people will just do HIPAA. A lot of people will just do OSHA and Medicare. I haven't heard of anybody that just does the employment law. That's just kind of, sometimes I see that as more of a bonus with our companies, but we do create a policy manual that coincides with that. But you have training. After you've done training, you'll put the certificates in this binder. There's also some customized policies and procedures that you'll do in the online portal that will go in your compliance plans binder. And then you'll have a reference guide and also a business associate contract binder that's included in the manuals. So you actually have 4 manuals on here. And these manuals are constantly updated. We are sending quarterly newsletters, and the picture that you're now seeing is a quarterly newsletter that's signed and dated and reviewed with all the staff and then tucked away in that compliance plans binder. And that's to show the paper trail to an auditor that you have been compliant. So it may seem like a lot, but weekly and monthly updates are sent out. Now, when I say an update, you may say, well, what does an update really look like? So recently, there have been quite a few updates with HHS on how they've been involved with the Trump administration and things that they're cracking down on with cybersecurity, different protocols that they're focusing on specifically, updates around business associate contracts or certain forms, major changes with any of the compliance regulations. Okay, these are some of the updates that we provide. Again, the quarterly newsletter, we do phone and email support. If you contact us, we have a support team to help you here. Probably the biggest thing that people say about HCSI is not only do we make things simple, but we do a quarterly assessment with all of our new customers. They receive quarterly mentorship, where every quarter we give you a call and we assess your account. We go over who has trained and who still needs to train. And you will actually be able to see that. There is a screen under employees that will show you who has and hasn't done training. But we'll review that with you. We'll make sure you've done your risk assessments. We'll make sure you understand how to get business associates signing those agreements, those contracts, as well as identifying who should be based on your type of practice. So every single time they're in the call, there is there's an emphasis after we do a quick assessment. There's an emphasis that our implementation specialists will present to you so that you can create that culture of compliance. Okay. And we feel like in a year, that compliance officer will feel well enough supported to where they feel like they have the autonomy to communicate and engage with the culture that's been created there to incorporate the culture of compliance. So there are a lot of forms. In fact, there's about 100. If you consider OSHA, HIPAA, Medicare, and employment law, there are about 100. Also, within these customizable forms, you have posters, you have breach notification, you have risk analysis, and notice of privacy practices, which should be filled out all the time. Okay, so you've got the online program, which is the training, the customizable forms, the customized areas with some of the procedures. We do put all of our newsletters that we've sent out. We actually do upload that in the online program, so you can see that in there. And then those binders, and the ongoing support. Well, I appreciate you watching so far. I just wanted to share a couple of the customer testimonials that I love to share. I appreciate this one. This is from Dr. Cody Kraus. He's of Comfort Dental. And here he says that our HIPAA and OSHA compliance was a huge concern in our office, especially after one of our employees filed a complaint with OSHA. We started using HCSI 4 years ago and couldn't be happier with the program. It's simple to set up and easier to use. Do yourself a favor and sign up. It will make your life easier. And that's really what we're saying here is this is a way to make this very easy. It is extremely affordable, and I'll share more information about that in just a minute. Kind of a comical customer testimonial. HCSI kept my fanny out of the who's cow with a cranky, which is a weirdo or psycho person, according to Lee. So kept my fanny out of the who's cow with a cranky patient who thought we had been naughty in multiple ways. Our association with you made all the difference. We passed the inspection with flying colors, and OCR told the patient to bug off. Loved it. So we have this 30-day money-back guarantee. We want to make sure this works for you. This needs to make sense for your practice. We'd love to see if it can. We do give you a 30-day money-back guarantee. I've never given one of those. I've never had to. Nobody's ever asked for it. And so I hope that you will be amazed in how simple this program is. Everything down again and put price next to it. The compliance officer training is something that really differentiates our organization. Have you ever gone to a seminar and had specific compliance officer training, or has it just been kind of staff training? Well, most people have to go to a community college, or they'll learn in one of their graduate programs how to be a compliance officer. But this isn't a common thing. And so this is one thing that definitely sets us apart. And we need our compliance officers to be trained so we can work with them on creating that culture of compliance. Again, that's where we feel it's best achieved. That's when the success is best achieved, is when there's a compliance officer who feels like they know what's going on. Then you have the employee training at $500, a risk analysis, which I had a person call us saying that they had just paid $1,000 for a risk assessment, a risk analysis. $250 is the price here. Customized compliance plans, $1,250. Okay, we've already created these compliance plans for you, and there's areas to actually further customize them because they have to be. They actually have to be customized to your office and location. They have to be office and location specific. Customized forms, same thing. Posters, compliance updates, newsletters, phone and email support, and that's included in the implementation program where we contact you every quarter. So here's what we're willing to offer you today, okay? And this is an offer that will end by 5 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. And so that's in 2 hours. So if you're interested in receiving a $300 discount for watching with us today, please email lking@hcsiinc.com or call at 801-947-0183. Now, for 5 years, if you want to pay for a 5-year account with us, it is $2,600 base and then $3 for each employee. So if you have 100 staff members, then that's $300 plus $2,600 or $2,900 for 5 years. Or if you determine that the best thing is to try us out for the first year, it's $1,189 is the base and then $3 per employee. Now, the second year, third year, fourth year, and fifth year, after the first year, first year, we, again, do a lot to help ramp up the office in terms of helping them get the compliance officer aware of which forms need to be filled out, how to do the risk assessment, which safeguards need to be implemented, and how to implement the ongoing internal compliance procedures. So there's a lot on our part that we do to work as your compliance partner. If you feel that we've been a valuable partner, then we only want to charge $350 plus $3 an employee every year after the first year. Okay. So I'm taking $300 off. That's pretty much your next year's payment for your compliance partnership. Okay, so allow us to be your compliance partnership. Email us at lking@hcsiinc.com or support@hcsiinc.com. And again, just want to emphasize a couple of things before we end the presentation today. The compliance officer is a pivotal instrument in implementing a culture of compliance. It should not be the doctor. The doctor has so much going on. And in many cases, we have dental offices, for example, that will have somebody in the front be a HIPAA and an HR person, and somebody in the back will be OSHA and Medicare. So split up those responsibilities, focus on the compliance officer and bringing up the speed with the training and with the ongoing mentorship. Customized policies and procedures. Well, a lot of practices that I've gone to have looked like this. So they've had these policies and procedures that are just all over the place, not really organized. There's, again, nothing that's real formal. And so we would admonish you to make time to do that, even if it's an internal thing without healthcare compliance solutions. What sets us apart is we truly care about helping you to create a culture of compliance. Years ago, we didn't do a very good job at this, admittedly. We would email, we would do calls at the end of the year to renew your account so that you could stay with us. But one of the things we learned is a lot of people, they would kind of forget about us. They would forget about us after a few months. After the emotion of getting compliance and their program implemented, they would just kind of forget about compliance until the end of the year. And so what we determined is that every 4 months or every 3 months, every quarter, these calls, if you end up slipping away from this, this thing of magic, which is this compliance program, if your compliance program starts to wane, we help bring things back together. We help refocus the compliance officer to make sure that they are incorporating those compliance plans, make sure that they're aware of specific documents that they should be filling out or have on the horizon. But I would say this is probably our most important area within the program. My name's Lance King. I am the Vice President of Sales with Healthcare Compliance Solutions. My email, my phone number, that's the office number here. My direct number is 801-702-7283. So there you have that. And again, if you'd like $300 off, you have about an hour and a half to talk with people. If you'd like me to email you just a quick demo, just email lking@hcsiinc.com. If you have any questions, please email me and we can help you with your culture of compliance. Well, this has been a HIPAA breach, identifying a breach and exceptions to a breach presentation. Thank you so much for making time with me today. It is Friday, so hopefully you continue to make it a great day, make it a great weekend, and I'll look forward to seeing you for the 4th of 12 presentations in this series of 12 webinar presentations from Healthcare Compliance Solutions. Thank you so much, and make it a great day.